Here's a lady who thinks rights have to come from a god.
To be really relevant in crafting a Christian view, we should start with exactly those things that people are asking about. For example, there's an unprecedented number of movements these days for rights, for equality, for freedom, and yet the dominant worldviews of our day, as we have seen, deny the reality of freedom.
Yeah.
They give no basis for rights or dignity.
I'm not sure what she means when she says that people deny the reality of freedom, because she says it as though she thinks that the folks who wish to create new freedoms are somehow contradicting themselves by fighting for these freedoms to be established. Of course, someone who is trying to establish a freedom that doesn't yet exist would deny that it currently exists. The fact that such a freedom doesn't currently exist is the whole point of fighting for it. The same goes for dignity.
So where did the idea of equal rights even come from?
There are likely lots of folks who believe that equal rights exist as some free-floating platonic form, or that they are granted by a god, but you don't have to believe either of those things to care about them. Lots of academics who study the concept will tell you that equal rights, like many abstract notions, are social constructs. I believe the only coherent definition of a right is a freedom or entitlement that someone's community commits to granting them and to at least some degree does grant them. I avoid saying things like healthcare is a right with respect to places where no such right is legally recognized. Rather, I say that I want healthcare to be a right. I fight for it to be a right. I vote for it to be established and protected as a legal right.
You know, back in the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche said it came from Christianity. He said it comes from the concept of the equality of all souls before God, and that this was really the origin of all theories of equal rights.
Right.
The contemporary atheist, Richard Rorty, also said the same thing. He said it was the idea of universal human rights was completely novel, and is completely novel historically speaking, and that it rested on the biblical teaching that we are all created in the image of God.
The fact that the idea is completely novel, historically speaking, makes it awfully odd that it would rest entirely on a biblical passage composed several thousand years ago. I think the idea has more influences than just the Bible, and the definition of rights that I use doesn't lean on the Bible at all.
And you see that in our founding documents are just explicit with that, which is nice. Yeah.
Exactly. What I like about the Rorty quote is then he goes on to say, you know, that he realized he's a Darwinist, he's an atheist, he's an evolutionist, and he said, I realize in the Darwinian worldview there is no basis for human rights because in the struggle for existence, the strong win and the weak are left behind.
That's right.
And so he says, where do I get the concept of human rights?
Yeah.
I'm happy to reach over and borrow it from our Judeo-Christian heritage. And he calls himself a freeloading atheist.
Yeah.
And even if you do take the idea from the Bible, that in no way obligates you to take anything else from the Bible.
Well, they are all that in some measure because in order for them to maintain their genuine humanity, they are going to have to step out of their worldview and take things from our worldview.
I don't see what I have to take from the Christian worldview in order to maintain my genuine humanity, but even if I did have to take something from it, I don't see why the beliefs Christians came up with are a package deal.
And this is a great example of that. I think people don't realize that all rights claims are moral claims. They are claims about how we ought to behave towards other creatures who have intrinsic value.
That's not what my rights claims are. I even try to avoid saying we ought to have a right to X, or we should have a right to X. I try only to say things like I want a right to X, or I will vote for a right to X, or my country provides a right to X. I understand that a lot of people may dislike the idea that rights are contingent upon a community providing them, because that community could take them away. But if a community doesn't recognize, provide, and protect a right, in what practical sense do you still have it? What good is it to have a right if people around you don't recognize or respect that right? If a community doesn't respect a right, then having it in any other sense is of no practical consequence. A right is meaningless in such a context.
None of these notions, objective morality, intrinsic value, human rights, have any foundation of any sort in a materialistic or naturalistic worldview, as Rorty has pointed out.
Nor do they need one. I'm going to lobby and vote for the rights I want, whether there's any cosmic supernatural foundation for them or not. So why does this even matter?
One of my favorite philosophers these days is John Gray. He's a British philosopher, and I like him only because he's kind of a modern Nietzsche. He really is trying to be totally honest about the implications of materialism. And he, too, has said, and this is a quote. He says, "Darwin has shown us that we are animals. So the idea of free will does not come from science. Its origins are in religion, and not just any religion, but the Christian faith that atheists love to rail against."
What does the fact that we come from animals have to do with whether or not we have free will? How do you know animals don't have free will? And even if they don't, how do you know humans can't have acquired it in the course of our evolution? And what does the question of whether we have free will have to do with the discussion? Do you think we need to have free will in order to sensibly demand political freedoms? Even if everything we do is predetermined, we can still ask that many of the things we do not be predetermined by government coercion. There's no contradiction or hypocrisy in that.
So he says, any concept of human dignity, any concept of humans having a special status is a secular version of Christianity.
I don't agree with that. You don't need to read the Bible to be convinced that there are a few things that humans can do that no other animal can. You don't need to know anything about Christianity to value humans for these unique abilities. And while I do think that humans are special, I also think Christians tend to exaggerate exactly how special we are. That's why they hold a human zygote to be as valuable as a human with a nervous system who is capable of suffering.
So what this means is that there are elements of a Christian worldview that is so compelling and so appealing that even non-Christians keep trying to claim them.
I love
they're all freeloading atheists.
Right.
Anywhere you turn, you'll find this dynamic of freeloading atheists, people who want what only Christianity has to give. And if we focus on those areas, then we will craft an apologetic that's very positive and that focuses on the very things that secular people sense that they need and are reaching out to grab from the Christian perspective. By focusing on those, we can show that Christianity is not only true, but also very appealing.
Even if there were true ideas within Christianity that only came from Christianity, which I'm not convinced is the case, that wouldn't mean that the essential doctrines of Christianity are true. To argue that some uniquely Christian ideas are true means that Christianity per se is true is to argue fallaciously. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.